President Trump's recent overt actions targeting political enemies is unlike anything seen from prior administrations. Here to help us make sense of it is Nick Allard, founding dean of the Jacksonville University College of Law. Dean Allard, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on this important topic.
So it has been, as we said, a really dramatic week for the justice system here in the United States. And maybe the best way to begin is to just sort of begin with a recitation of the uncontested facts of what's occurred. Basically, the president's former personal attorney, who has no prosecutorial experience, has filed criminal charges against one of her boss's top enemies, former FBI Director James Comey. She did this despite the conclusion of her predecessor that there was not enough evidence to seek an indictment. And so this process has moved ahead. What makes this unusual, that set of facts?
Well, so many things, and I haven't been able to find a single knowledgeable person who's had experience in this area who feels that this was precedented. There's never been before a prosecutorial decision overruled from the White House. So that in itself. Second, given the nature of this, and given the duties and responsibilities of lawyers, in addition to their duties, to perform well and everything else, it's just a complete breach of the rules, the constitutional rule of law, protections that are designed to protect the American people from the abuse of government power. And so in every single respect, it is managing, because it may seem to be a hyper-technical legal rule, to stand out when there are so many other things going on in the world, from a government shutdown to all sorts of other concerns about unprecedented behavior, to tariffs, to economic concerns. This is receiving the spotlight. So I think it's a good marker that is a very significant constitutional issue, which is unfortunately existential to our democracy.
For people who don't know why this might be unusual, can you sort of explain what role a prosecutor has when it comes to bringing an indictment and why this deviates from that?
Well, a prosecutor does chase bad people. That's their job. But the ultimate goal of a prosecutor is justice. It's not conviction. Although, when they properly exercise their discretion, they usually get convictions. Now, in this case, you have seasoned, experienced prosecutors. And by the way, when a judge or a lawyer or a prosecutor or a public defender is performing as a lawyer, they are, even though they have political beliefs, they have bosses, they have clients, they need to be vigorous advocates. Their duty and obligation is to law and the justice and to the professional responsibilities. So there has to be a case there. And if they don't believe that there is a case to bring, that it is unjust, they are obliged not to pursue it. And that's what happened in the opinion of people and other folks who examined the actual facts of this case. And I'll just add, Ann, that sure, clients and lawyers, prosecutors are lawyers, they have an obligation to their client and to their ultimate client, which is the American people, but they also, like Hebrew National hot dogs, have to answer to a higher authority. And by the way, I give a shout out to, Happy New Year and Good Yontif to your Jewish listeners. I know this is a very important week. But they're not unbridled in what their responsibilities are. And so they are not supposed to be operating for political reasons. They're supposed to be operating as officers of the court and constitutional responsible people.
So this prosecutor that was recently appointed, as we mentioned, former personal attorney for the president, Lindsay Halligan, we mentioned that she doesn't have any experience as a prosecutor. In fact, it was reported that she went into the wrong courtroom initially and then kind of stood on the wrong side of the judge. She doesn't have really any courtroom experience that would help her in this case. And she personally presented this case to the grand jury, which is pretty unusual for a U.S. attorney. The New York Times even reported that she has not been fully briefed on the case, just given the timeline. So what was the rush to bring this indictment at this point right now?
Well, today, September 30th, is the 5th anniversary of the hearing, the Senate Judiciary hearing, where James Comey gave the testimony in question, which is the basis for the allegations against him. So the statute of limitation runs today. So there was a big rush when the established career leader of the Eastern District Office of the United States Attorneys determined not to bring it. The president, and we don't have to doubt what the motivations are, we can go by what he said, was very concerned and wanted to, as a matter of retribution, and because he disliked strongly Mr. Comey, he wanted the case to be brought before the statute of limitations. So he forced out, or the existing U.S. attorney resigned, and he
That's
immediately
Eric Siebert, who
Eric Siebert, and then he was immediately replaced by Mr. Trump's staffer, who had never tried a case before, who was a personal lawyer and who represented him personally in the past.
If you're just joining us, we were talking to attorney and founding dean of the Jacksonville University Law School, Nick Allard. If you have questions or comments, you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. Nick, this is clearly happening over the objections of not just the former U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert, but also many staff attorneys who also believed there wasn't sufficient evidence to bring an indictment in this case at the Department of Justice. Is there some role that the Supreme Court's previous decision on presidential granting kind of broad powers to the president in terms of immunity, does that play any role in the president's willingness to take to have such a heavy hand in ordering the Department of Justice to bring an indictment in this case, as he has done on social media?
Well, Donald Trump is testing the edges across the board, and is crossing a lot of lines and abandoning a lot of norms to test the full power that he has. And he would be immune, I guess, for at least while he's serving, for actions that he's taken now. But this really is a brazen test of the limits of the ability to use the power of the government, to use the courts and the judicial system to punish and go after your political foes. And the reason it's so concerning is it, by their own indication, the White House advisors and senior people and the president are indicating that there are others that are soon to follow. So this is a real Rubicon that has been passed, and it'll be addressed. But it's one that's very difficult, but not because of the immunity of the president. It's very difficult because, understandably, a prosecutor has great discretion and is entrusted to make good decisions, and they're given wide latitude. Now, once you have an indictment from a grand jury, which was obtained in this case, it would be ordinarily very, very difficult to challenge that prosecutorial discretion as an abuse of that discretion. But in this case, the dots line up, and the very frequent statements before and after about the purpose for bringing this case, and the fact that others reviewed and declined until somebody was found that would be willing to execute the order and bring the indictment, actually undermine the chances for success of an already weak case. And the people who have analyzed the underlying facts, they're actually contradict the responsibility that is alleged for Mr. Comey for making a false statement before a congressional hearing.
I want to talk a little bit about how this could impact the case going forward and weaken it, as you say. But I just want to say, people who support Donald Trump have said that this is just an example of James Comey being held responsible. He's not necessarily beloved by either side of the political spectrum, but he has long been a target of this president for, trespasses dating back to a refusal to give a loyalty oath, and then also his shepherding through some of the investigation, the Mueller investigation into possible Russian interference in the first election of Donald Trump. And so this relationship goes back a long ways, but people who are supporters of the president and critical of James Comey say this is legitimate. He lied. He, obfuscated. He was orchestrated leaks, and this is justified. And I guess I just want to ask you, if we were to assume that it is justified, that this uh, um, pursuit of James Comey is justified. Are there problems with the way that this went down anyway?
Yes. But there's two particular issues to unpack. First was whether the case was justified and is supported by sufficient facts that it means they're likely to get a conviction. I'll put that to one side, but I can answer that pretty quickly, I think. But the other is the way this came down, is that appropriate? And the laws and the protections are not just for people you like. They're not just for popular people. They are intentionally to assure that everybody, even people who have engaged in blatant wrongs or heinous acts, get the fair shake of the law. And we're only willing to exercise punishment if the processes that should be adhered to are fairly adhered to. So this is a breach of that. And Mr. Comey is, you can also understand he's not popular among a broad spectrum of people on the different political sides. But the founders, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, and the people that wrote the Constitution understood that people are not angels, and that angels will not govern. It will be people who govern. And because it's people, you need these protections. And that's why there was a separation of powers. That's why all these other things were baked in, the importance of independent judges. And that's why all the rights of individuals in the Bill of Rights to speak out, not be censored, to have different political views, and not be punished by the government. All these rights are to protect people, not so much from each other, but from abuse of government power. So that's what's wrong. Now, with respect to whether there's a case there, objective experts, but including the prosecutors whose job and who are inclined to prosecute, they looked at the facts, and not only were the facts irrelevant to the hearing, which was the Judiciary Committee examining the Russian investigation, which bothers Mr. Trump, but the facts, the leak that was the subject of this, related to the Hillary Clinton investigation that Comey also ran. And also, not only was that make the fact irrelevant to the proceeding, so it wasn't, something that you can say affected or obstructed the proceeding, arguably, but in addition, the two people that might have testified about the leak said that they informed Mr. Comey after the fact that the leak occurred. So, and there's many other reasons. So the judgment is that you're very unlikely that you're going to get. So the third question that you might ask is, well, if there's no case there, and the people at the White House are highly intelligent people and analysts, and they must know the chances are remote at best, why bring the case? And the answer is that just bringing a case has the effect of imposing the cost and opprobrium, and it has a cost. And so it's punishment in itself to have to go through that process, and it also intimidates others. And now there's an explicit statement that they intend and expect there to be others very soon. McCabe, who is also a successor to Mr. Comey, George Soros is under investigation.
Adam Schiff, Letitia
James. And then there's investigations ongoing into the mortgage practices of several former government officials. And so this is really a very slippery slope that can unravel and be a path that soon you cannot recover from.
We have a question on Facebook that's saying, do you think the so-called lying was about Comey saying he didn't tell anyone to leak information? Can he and others legally leak information? And I want to ask you that in the context of this indictment itself, which is unusual, just in the fact that it's so light on details and so brief. It's just 2 pages.
It's extremely sparse, so you really don't know very much what the grand jury, what was presented to them. And grand juries are, inclined. They, in fact, rejected one of the 3 articles of indictment that were brought. But leaking is not necessarily a crime. It can be in a tool that's used judiciously or communicating to the press. I mean, that's a whole different subject. But lying about whether you leaked or not to a congressional inquiry where you're under oath, it's the lying, it's not the leaking.
Okay.
And so, but in this case, there, I'm not aware, I could be wrong, and I'm not privy to all the facts, but it sure doesn't look like, and the other objective prosecutors that weren't forced to bring the case believed that there was no evidence that would substantiate a prosecution for perjury.
What do you think is happening for the people who are working at the Department of Justice? And up to and including Pam Bondi, who is obviously hails from Florida, the Attorney General. She is now getting sort of open solicitations on social media from her boss, commanding her to see that justice is done, essentially, and to punish these named people. I mean, specifically in the social media post he made, he mentioned Letitia James, James Comey, and Senator Adam Schiff.
Sometimes it's very direct, and sometimes it's obvious, but it's not so direct. It reminds me of Henry II saying, "Who will rid me of that troublesome priest?" And then, of course, the priest was executed. But it's I lost the thread there. What was the question?
Well, just what it is, what you imagine the experience is like to be working at the Department of
Sure.
Justice at this time.
Thank you for getting me back on track. Marla says, my wife says, that if I ever had an autobiography, the title would be "I Digress." So I'm sorry. It's disheartening. I can imagine, because it's disheartening for so many lawyers that I know and talk about, to see what is the standard profession that we love and that is committed to service, to be like this. So the people there are completely disheartened, and they're leaving in droves, and the Justice Department is being hollowed out from very experienced, high-value people. And in the Eastern District, several people have already resigned, and there'll be more to follow. So that's the impact. From afar, it's disheartening and concerning. It should be concerning to every American citizen, but it's got to be concerning for people that are employed there.
Got just about a minute left. Sally in Springfield. Good morning, Sally. Go ahead.
Good morning. Yes, thank you for this show. This incident of bringing an indictment against Comey is just another incident in the turmoil that's going on in this country, what with the tariffs and the farmers and the bombing of boats in other countries, cutting benefits, holding up the extension of the Obama healthcare subsidies. It's not good. All this fighting and lawsuits, it's just not good for our country. And it's very upsetting to see the leader of our country causing all this strife. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Appreciate your
Sally,
comments.
Can I just suggest something? That it can be extremely daunting if you look at all of the things that are going on. But no single individual or organization has to solve all the problems. And what helps is, if there's something particularly that's near and dear to your heart that you feel strongly about, to pick one or two things, or to stand up. Now, for lawyers, it may be, for example, bar associations looking at whether the license, the requirements for the license, and the oath that every student, our 91.7% of our graduates who just passed the Florida bar.
Congrats.
Sorry, I had to work that in.
No, that's great.
But the oath that they're taking, and I would suggest if anybody who's one of your listeners wants to Google and look up the oath of that lawyers take when they become a licensed member of the Florida bar, that oath, the promises they make, are directly relevant to this important conversation that you've hosted today.
Well, congrats again on your student success. Nick Allard, Dean of the Jacksonville University Law School, thanks so much for coming on this morning.
Anytime.